The fluorescent hum of the terminal was a dull ache behind my eyes. It always was this late. The empty desk stretched out in neat rows, each a silent testament to the day's labor now abandoned. I traced the worn plastic of the mouse, the cool, smooth surface of familiar comfort. This was my sanctuary, my escape from the gnawing uncertainty that had become my constant companion. My rent was late again. The landlord's passive-aggressive notes were becoming bolder, the red ink bleeding through the cheap paper. Raj, he'd written, the ink thick and smug, "This is your final warning." I leaned back, the worn fabric of my chair groaning in protest. My fingers danced across the keyboard, the rhythmic clatter a small defiance against the encroaching silence. The screen glowed, a sterile blue light reflecting in my tired eyes. Outside, the city lights blurred into a hazy, indifferent smear. My future felt just as indistinct. A dead-end job, a cramped apartment, a mountain of debt. The inheritance, when it arrived, felt less like a miracle and more like a cruel joke. A distant relative, a name I'd never heard, leaving me. What? The email sat in my inbox, unopened for days. A solicitor's firm, their letterhead formal and imposing. "Raj," it began, "I am writing to I regarding the estate of my great-aunt, Elara Vance." I'd skimmed the attachments, the legal jargon, a dense fog I couldn't penetrate. But one phrase had snagged my attention, a golden thread woven into the drab tapestry of legal minutiae. Residence known as Blackwood Manor. All its contents to be bequeathed solely to Raj, provided he takes up residence within 6 months of notification. A substantial sum was mentioned, an amount so astronomical it felt like a typo. Blackwood Manor. The name itself conjured images of crumbling Gothic architecture, of shadowed hallways and whispering winds. The accompanying documents included a photograph, a grainy black and white image of a sprawling, imposing structure silhouetted against a bruised twilight sky. It looked less like a home and more like a tomb, and the will was explicit: residence. Not a visit, not a weekend. I had to live there. My colleagues, the few who bothered to notice my perpetual state of distraction, had offered platitudes. "A fresh start, Raj," one had said, his voice laced with a pity I couldn't stand. "You're so lucky, lucky." I felt more like a pawn in some unseen game. The solicitor's office was miles away, in a town I'd only ever seen on a map. The details were scarce, the directions vague. Blackwood Manor, the email stated, was located in an isolated rural setting. Isolated. The word echoed in the cavernous space of the library after hours, computers still logged in, the only sound the faint whirring of the machines. I clicked on the attached map. A single winding road leading to a distant point, a stark red marker against a vast expanse of green. No other roads branched off. No towns nearby. Just the manor and miles of empty, unforgiving landscape. A shiver, unrelated to the building's stale air conditioning, traced its way down my spine. The promise of wealth was a powerful lure, a desperate lifeline in the churning sea of my financial despair. But the isolation, that was the kicker. It felt like a deliberate trap. I imagined Elara Vance, this forgotten relative, sitting in her dusty study, penning this peculiar will. What was she like? Did she crave solitude, or was this her final, twisted joke? The thought of being completely alone, miles from anyone, in a house that seemed to loom with secrets. It was a terrifying prospect, but the alternative was far worse. The slow, suffocating grind of my current existence. The hum of the computers seemed to grow louder, more insistent. I pushed myself up, my muscles stiff. Time to go. The city outside still pulsed with life, a distant, mocking symphony. But soon I knew my world would shrink. It would become the cold stone walls of Blackwood Manor, the rustling of unseen things in the overgrown gardens, the endless, suffocating silence. I gathered my meager belongings, the weight of them feeling heavier than usual. The solicitor had given me a date, 7 days. 7 days to pack up my entire life and drive to a place that promised nothing but emptiness. Was I truly willing to trade one kind of emptiness for another, potentially far more sinister kind? The question hung in the air, unanswered as I stepped out of the library after hours, computers still logged in, and into the indifferent night. The hum of the servers in the library after hours, computers still logged in, was a low thrum beneath my skin. It was a sound I'd grown accustomed to, a constant companion in the quiet hours. My eyes traced the lines of code on the monitor, each character a familiar symbol in the digital landscape I navigated. I was chasing a ghost in the machine, a financial anomaly that hinted at the vast wealth the will promised. It was a puzzle, a meticulously crafted labyrinth, and I was determined to find the center. The city lights outside, a distant smear of color, offered no comfort, only a reminder of the world I was temporarily detached from. The will. It was the only tangible link to this distant relative, a man whose name meant nothing to me. A name I'd looked up, of course, but found only a sparse digital footprint, like a shadow that had deliberately scrubbed itself clean. The mansion, it was described as a place of quiet contemplation, and the inheritance was contingent on me residing there for a full year. A year. It felt like an eternity, but the promise of financial freedom, of escaping the endless grind, was a siren song I couldn't ignore. I saved the file, the familiar click of the mouse echoing in the cavernous room. The air here was always cool, carrying the faint, pleasant scent of old paper and polish. I stretched, my muscles protesting the long hours hunched over the keyboard. The silence pressed in, not the peaceful quiet of contemplation, but a waiting, heavy silence. I packed my meager belongings into a single duffel bag. The road narrowed, becoming a winding, unpaved track that scraped against the undercarriage of my car. By the time the iron gates loomed into view, etched with a crest I didn't recognize, the last vestiges of daylight had bled from the sky. The mansion itself was a silhouette against the bruised twilight. Ivy clawed at its walls, a verdant shroud that seemed to swallow the stone. A single, skeletal tree stood sentinel in the overgrown front yard, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. The key, heavy and ornate, turned in the lock with a groan that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying a scent I couldn't quite place, a cloying sweetness, like decaying flowers, mingled with the mustiness of ages. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor, each sound amplified, distorted. I explored the main hall, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow me, their painted smiles unnerving. That first night's sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of wind against the ancient windows was magnified, twisted into something sinister. I told myself it was just an old building settling, a symphony of age and neglect. But the feeling persisted, a prickle on my skin, a tightness in my chest. I woke to a soft tapping, not at the window but from within the room. I sat bolt upright, my heart thudding against my ribs. It was a delicate, rhythmic sound like fingernails on wood. I scanned the room, my flashlight beam trembling. Nothing. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it began. I lay back down, pulling the heavy quilt tighter, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It was just the house, I repeated, just the house. But my mind, ever the skeptic, began to churn with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The next day I tried to shake off the unease. I spent hours in the dusty library, surrounded by rows and rows of forgotten knowledge. The sheer volume of books was overwhelming, their leather bindings cracked and faded. I found a large, leather-bound ledger on a heavy oak desk, its pages filled with meticulous, spidery script. It looked like a record of some kind, but the entries were cryptic, filled with dates, numbers, and what appeared to be astrological symbols. It was unintelligible, a sibilant murmur that seemed to coil in the air before dissipating. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The library was empty, the only sound the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. I told myself it was the wind, a draft from one of the ill-fitting windows, but there was no wind. The air was still heavy. Later, I was exploring the grand ballroom, a cavernous space choked with dust sheets. My flashlight beam caught a glint of movement in the corner of my eye. It was too quick, too fluid to be a trick of the light. I froze, my muscles tensed, my breath catching in my lungs. I forced myself to move, my legs like lead, and peered behind the furniture. Just cobwebs and the lingering scent of decay. Was I losing my grip? The isolation, the sheer strangeness of this place, was it getting to me? I tried to rationalize each incident, each unsettling sensation. Old houses creak, but the feeling of being watched, of being unwelcome, was a constant, gnawing presence. It was a feeling that burrowed deep, and I couldn't shake the terrifying suspicion that the house wasn't just old but alive, and it knew I was here. What did it want from me? My eyes traced the lines of code on the monitor, each character a familiar symbol in the digital landscape I was trying to untangle. The will, that damnable cryptic will. It spoke of secrets hidden within the mansion's digital heart, and I was determined to find them. The wealth promised was immense, enough to erase every worry, every debt that had clung to me like a shroud. But the price, it seemed, was my sanity. I'd been here for weeks now, and the isolation was starting to feel like a physical weight. The nearest town was a good hour's drive, and the cell reception was a joke. My phone, a lifeline to the world I'd left behind, was mostly a useless brick. I tried calling my old friends, my family, but the conversations always felt strained, distant. They couldn't understand the pull this place had on me, the oppressive silence that wasn't truly silent but filled with tiny, unidentifiable noises that seemed to whisper just beyond the edge of hearing. Tonight, the hum of the servers felt louder, more insistent. It vibrated through the worn mahogany of the desk, up my arms, settling in my teeth. I rubbed my temples, trying to focus. The code on the screen swam for a moment, the stark white characters blurring against the black background. I blinked and they snapped back into focus. It was a routine diagnostic I'd written myself, a way to keep the ancient system running, or so I told myself. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper gloom at the edge of the room. My breath hitched. It was just the old house settling, I reasoned, the wind playing tricks with the light filtering through the grimy windows. But my gaze snapped to the spot, my muscles tensing. Nothing. Just the familiar dust-laden bookshelves, their spines a dull, uniform brown in the dim light. I returned to the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The lines of code seemed to mock me, meaningless jumbles of symbols. I felt a prickle of sweat on my brow. My father, he'd always been so proud of my technical skills. He'd push me relentlessly to excel. "I have a gift, Raj," he'd say, his voice laced with an almost desperate hope. "Don't waste it." But I had. I drifted, taken dead-end jobs, lived hand-to-mouth, always just a step away from the success he'd envisioned. This inheritance, this mansion, it was my chance to finally prove him wrong, or perhaps to finally prove him right. A soft rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor, drew my attention again. This time it was closer. I swiveled in my chair, my eyes scanning the rows of antique furniture draped in white sheets. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something faintly metallic like old pennies. My heart, which I was trying desperately to keep steady, gave a sudden, violent lurch. I stood, my legs feeling stiff as if they belonged to someone else. The servers continued their low, steady thrum, a counterpoint to the frantic beat in my chest. I took a hesitant step towards the noise, then another. The rustling stopped. I held my breath, listening, only the servers, my own ragged breathing, so faint I almost dismissed it as the wind. But it wasn't the wind, it was a voice, my name. Raj. It was barely audible, a breath of sound, but it was enough to send a tremor through me. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. Who was there? I was alone. I had been alone for weeks. I checked the locks myself every night. No one could get in. My gaze darted to the computers. The screens glowed, displaying the lines of code, the diagnostics I'd been running. They looked different. The cursor, which had been steadily blinking, was now still. And the characters on the screen, the familiar symbols of my own creation, seemed to rearrange themselves before my eyes. No, it was the strain, the lack of sleep, the gnawing anxiety. I was seeing things, hearing things. My father's voice, his disappointment, it was all playing tricks on my mind. I forced myself to look away from the screens to focus on the physical world. The heavy oak door to the library stood closed as I'd left it. The windows were bolted from the inside. I was safe. I can't hide, Raj. My hands clenched into fists. My knuckles were white, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The promise of wealth, the need to prove myself, it was a trap, and I was caught. I looked back at the monitors. The code was a jumbled mess now, meaningless and chaotic. It was like looking into a shattered mirror, reflecting only fragments of my own failing mind. And then on one of the screens, a single line of text appeared, stark and bold against the black. I know what you're afraid of. My breath hitched. It wasn't just the house. It was something inside it, something that knew me. What was it, and how could it possibly know? The silence of the mansion pressed in, a physical weight against my eardrums. It wasn't an empty silence, but a listening one, like a predator holding its breath. My own breathing felt too loud, too ragged. I had to get out of this house. I had to find out what that thing was, what it knew. But the thought of stepping back out into the indifferent daylight, the mundane world that seemed so far away now, felt wrong, like abandoning a fight before it had truly begun. The will, the immense wealth, it was a lure, I knew that now, but was the lure the money or the challenge? A morbid curiosity, sharp and insistent, began to prickle beneath the surface of my fear. I was a writer after all. I dealt in stories, in peeling back layers to find the truth, however ugly. And this house, this presence, was the most compelling, terrifying story I had ever encountered. My gaze fell on the small, leather-bound journal I'd found tucked away in a hidden drawer of the desk in the study. It was filled with spidery, almost illegible script detailing things, observations, dates, strange symbols that made my stomach clench. I dismissed it at first, the ramblings of a lonely, perhaps unhinged ancestor. But now, after what I'd felt, after that chilling whisper in my mind, I wondered. I retrieved the journal from my room, the worn leather cool beneath my fingertips. The floorboards creaked underfoot, each sound amplified, distorted. There was that a sigh, or just the house settling. I didn't dare to think. Back in the study, I settled into the plush, dust-scented armchair. The oil lamp cast a flickering, unsteady glow, making the room seem to breathe. I opened the journal to a random page. It knows my name. It knows my shame. It feeds on the quiet, on the doubt. I try to resist, but the walls, they hold me, they remember. Shame, doubt. The words echoed in the cavernous space of my own mind. What did it know about me? My insecurities, my failures, the secret anxieties I barely admitted to myself. The journal felt hot in my hands, as if it pulsed with a borrowed life. I flipped further, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The library is my only solace. The old books, they offer a different kind of knowledge. The computers, they watch, they record, they are part of it now. The library, after hours, computers still logged in. That was an odd phrase. It sounded like a log entry, a fragment of a technical report. Why mention computers, and what did it mean, part of it now? A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, a violent, unnatural sound. My breath hitched. I closed the journal, the leather smooth and unnervingly warm. I needed to see this library. I needed to understand what my ancestor had meant. The thought of returning to that room, the one where I'd felt that initial, bone-deep unease, was almost unbearable. But the need to know, to decipher the cryptic warnings, was a stronger, more insidious force. It was a hunger. I stood, my legs feeling heavy, unsteady. I hesitated. There was the presence waiting for me. Was it guiding me, or was it simply there, an inherent part of the house's suffocating atmosphere? I made my way to the library, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. The scent of old paper and dust was stronger here, overlaid with something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, like old pennies in decay. The library was vast, shelves stretching towards the impossibly high ceiling, crammed with volumes of every age and size. And there they were, the computers. They looked utterly out of place amidst the ancient tomes, like metallic invaders. My ancestors' words came back to me. The computers, they watch. They are part of it now. Part of what? Part of the house, part of the entity that haunted it. I approached the nearest terminal, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I peered at the screen. A username was already typed in, a single anonymous word guessed. The password field was blank. It was as if someone or something had left it ready for me. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers hovering just above the keys. If I logged in, would I be stepping further into the trap? Or would I finally find the answers I craved? What secrets were held within these silent machines, within this tomb of knowledge? And more importantly, what would happen when I tried to uncover them? The words swam before my eyes. Library after hours, computers still logged in. It was a stark contrast to the feverish scrawl that surrounded it, the desperate pleas and fragmented descriptions of a life unraveling. Raj, that's me. I'm Raj, and I'm in this house, this thing. I traced the ink with my fingertip. The previous owner, my great-uncle Silas, had been meticulous, even in his descent into madness. What did he mean, computers? This library was ancient. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light slicing through a grimy window pane, illuminating shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound tomes. There wasn't a flicker of modern technology in sight, not a single wire or circuit board. Just the smell of decaying paper and something else, something faintly metallic like old blood. A sudden sharp creak echoed from the hallway. My breath hitched. I froze, straining my ears. Silence. Only the frantic drumming of my own pulse against my ribs. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses make noise, that's what I kept repeating. Old houses make noise, but the sound had been too deliberate, too close. I forced myself to look back at the journal. Silas's handwriting grew more erratic, the lines blurring as if his hand had shaken violently. They watch, always watching. The screens are their eyes, they learned, they adapted. What screens, what learned, it made no sense. He was clearly unwell. But then so was I to have come here to believe the promises of a fortune that felt increasingly like a trap. I stood up, my legs stiff. The air in the library was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. It felt colder than it had a moment ago, a creeping chill that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. I walked to the imposing oak desk, running my hand over its smooth, cool surface. It was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting my own pale, drawn face. Were they deeper than before, or was it just my imagination, fueled by Silas's descent into paranoia? He wrote about being trapped, about the house feeding. Feeding on what? My sanity, my fear. I remembered the first few days, the initial thrill of exploring the vast, silent rooms, the opulent if faded furnishings. I noticed a loose floorboard near the fireplace. Curiosity, a dangerous instinct in this place, pulled me towards it. I knelt, my fingers fumbling at the edge. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and dust, was a small, tarnished metal box. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't jewels or gold. And beneath them, a single, faded photograph. It showed a younger Silas, his face strangely smooth, almost featureless, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. And behind them, barely visible, was the outline of the house, its windows like vacant stairs. Mine. I recoiled, scrambling backward. The sound wasn't from outside. It was inside my head. My own voice, yet not my own. The library, with its musty books and silent computers that weren't there, felt like a cage. And the cage was alive. Silas's words echoed again, the fragment from the journal. Computers still logged in. What if he wasn't talking about actual machines? What if he meant something else? Something that could observe, learn, and communicate through me. I looked at the vials again. The liquid inside seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. A strange compulsion, a deep, unsettling thirst rose within me. I fought it, my grip tight as I gripped the edge of the desk. The house wasn't just malevolent, it was aware. It was a predator and I was its prey. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The metallic smell intensified, sharp and coppery. It was the smell of fear. It was the smell of blood. I stood, my legs shaking, and backed away from the desk, away from the box, away from the photograph. My gaze swept across the room, the bookshelves now appearing less like repositories of knowledge and more like rows of watching eyes. The silence was no longer empty, it was pregnant with anticipation. The house was waiting, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to drink. And as I stumbled towards the door, desperate to escape the suffocating stillness, I heard it again, clearer this time, a silken murmur that slithered into my very soul. I am part of it now. Was this what Silas meant? Was he referring to some unseen digital consciousness woven into the fabric of this place? A consciousness that had infected him and was now reaching for me. How could a house, a structure of wood and stone, be logged in? And what did it want with me, beyond the wealth it had promised? The air in the library was thick, not with dust but with a peculiar stillness that pressed against my eardrums. It was the kind of quiet that hums, a low thrumming beneath the surface of silence. The computers, their screens still aglow from the day's use, cast a sickly, flickering light across the polished mahogany tables. Each monitor was a small window into a world that felt impossibly far away, a world I was desperately trying to reconnect with. Raj, I reminded myself. You are Raj. I moved between the workstations, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the Persian rug. The screens displayed a chaotic tableau, spreadsheets half-filled, email drafts abandoned mid-sentence, web browser tabs open to a dizzying array of sites. It looked like a digital battlefield, a frantic attempt to communicate, to escape. Was this what Silas meant? And what did it want with me beyond the wealth? My fingers hovered over a keyboard, the plastic cool and alien beneath my touch. I needed to find a way out, a way to break this oppressive isolation. The will. It had to be more than just an inheritance. Silas had been meticulous, almost obsessive. He wouldn't have orchestrated this elaborate charade for a simple transfer of property. There was a purpose, a reason for this house, for its presence. I sat at one of the computers, the screen displaying a frozen image of a complex network diagram. Lines connected nodes, pulsing with a faint internal light. It looked like a map, but not of any place I knew. It felt alive. The screen flickered and the diagram shifted, morphing into a series of cryptic symbols. My breath hitched. I recognized them. They were similar to the etchings on the grandfather clock in the hall, the ones I'd dismissed as mere ornamentation. My gaze darted around the room, searching for any sign of intrusion, any logical explanation. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, sealing us in. The only sound was the faint whir of the computer's fan, a mechanical heartbeat in the suffocating quiet. I remembered the tremor in Silas's voice when he'd spoken of the house's connections. He hadn't been speaking metaphorically. I tried to focus, to think. What if the house wasn't just feeding on my fear, but actively learning from it? What if Silas had built this place not as a home, but as a prison, a sophisticated trap designed to ensnare its inhabitants? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I needed to get out. Now. I stood, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. The sound echoed, amplified in the vastness of the library. I walked towards the heavy oak door, my hand reaching for the brass knob. It wouldn't budge. I twisted harder, my knuckles turning white. It was locked. Of course it was locked. I hadn't heard it click, hadn't felt the tumblers fall into place. It had simply sealed itself. I turned back to the computers, my eyes scanning the screens with renewed desperation. One of them displayed a local news website, the headline screaming about a severe storm approaching the coast, the same coast this secluded mansion sat upon. The article mentioned widespread power outages and travel disruptions. It was a perfect alibi for my isolation. Was the house orchestrating this too? I noticed a single, unmarked USB drive plugged into the side of one of the computers. My heart hammered against my ribs. Silas's will had been delivered to me on a similar drive, the one that had led me here. This had to be important. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, the plastic smooth and cool. As my fingertips brushed against it, the screen in front of me went black, then flickered to life with a single stark word. No. The word pulsed, a malevolent red against the black. It wasn't just a message, it felt like a command, a visceral rejection. I snatched my hand away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The other screens mirrored the one before me, each displaying the same crimson admonition. The hum in the room intensified, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and up into my bones. I backed away, my eyes wide, scanning the room. The books on the shelves seemed to lean in, their spines like watchful eyes. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum now still, felt like a silent, ticking threat. I was trapped, not just by locked doors, but by a force that seemed to anticipate my every move, to twist my intentions into something monstrous. It wasn't just a physical hunger. It was a hunger for connection, for influence, for control. And I, with my inherited wealth and my inherited fear, was its prime target. The computers, once symbols of escape, now felt like the very tendrils of this house, extensions of its will, feeding it information, feeding it me. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a loose rug. I fell, the impact jarring my teeth. It was a small, intricately carved silver locket half hidden beneath the rug. I recognized it instantly. It was the locket my mother had worn, the one that had gone missing years ago, the one I'd searched for endlessly. How could it be here? Had Silas found it, or had the house itself taken it? And if it could take something so precious, what else could it take? The library after hours, computers still logged in. The hum intensified, a vibration felt more in my bones than heard. It was a sound that promised teeth, a gnawing insistence that clawed at the edges of my sanity. The monitors, each displaying a frozen tableau of my own frantic research, flickered with an unnatural synchronicity. Lines of code, research papers, scans of ancient blueprints all warped, the letters bleeding into one another like ink on damp paper. I'd left them active, a foolish oversight, but this was deliberate. My breath hitched. The air, already heavy, now felt viscous, clinging to my throat. I could smell it, a faint, cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun, overlaid with something metallic, coppery. It pricked the back of my nostrils. My gaze darted around the room, cataloging the familiar shadows that now seemed to deepen, to coalesce. The grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum stilled for years, a soft metallic tick, then another. My heart leaped into my throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs. It was impossible. The clock was broken. I backed away from the computers, my heel catching on the plush rug. The weave felt wrong, coarse, and brittle under my sock, like dried grass. A phantom chill snaked up my spine despite the room's oppressive warmth. I remembered the caretaker, the one who'd warned me about the house's memory. He'd spoken in hushed tones, his eyes wide, but I dismissed him as superstitious. Now the damp, earthy scent that had clung to him seemed to emanate from the very walls. The ticking grew louder, more insistent. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was no longer just the clock, it was in the floorboards, in the very air I breathed. It was the sound of time itself unraveling, or perhaps being meticulously rewound. I reached for the heavy oak door, my fingers brushing against the cool, polished wood. It felt strangely yielding, almost soft, like damp leather. I pulled. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, putting my shoulder into it, but it was as if I were pushing against a solid wall. I was trapped. The screens flickered again, more violently this time. Images began to swim across them, not the data I'd left, but something else. Faces. They were indistinct at first, like old photographs fading in the sun, then they sharpened. My parents, my sister. Their eyes, usually so full of life, were vacant, staring. They were mouthing words, but no sound escaped. A guttural whine started, low and continuous, emanating from the walls themselves. I stumbled back, my hands flying to my ears, but the sound was inside me, a resonant frequency that shook my very being. The room seemed to warp, the bookshelves bending inward, the ornate ceiling fan becoming a grotesque, spinning maw. The scent of decay intensified, thick and suffocating. I could feel it on my skin, a clammy film. My own reflection appeared on one of the screens, but it wasn't me. It came from everywhere and nowhere. I spun around, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They writhed, stretched, and flowed like dark water. I saw movement, a fleeting glimpse of something too tall, too thin, slithering just beyond the periphery of my vision. It smelled of damp earth and something acrid like old pennies. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop, for this to be a dream, a hallucination. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at the soles of my feet, trying to find purchase. My vision, even with my eyes closed, was filled with a searing white light, then a blinding black. There was the house trying to break me, to digest me from the inside out. And if it was, what would be left of Raj when it was done? The scraping. It hadn't stopped. It echoed in the hollow spaces of my skull, a constant, grating reminder. My breath hitched. I forced my eyes open, the dim light of the emergency exit sign above the door doing little to dispel the oppressive gloom. The air, thick and stagnant, carried the faintest scent of decay, like forgotten flowers left to rot. My feet were numb, but the sensation was beginning to return, a pin's end needle's agony that made me want to cry out. I tested my weight, my muscles screaming in protest. I didn't dare look down, not yet. The will had promised wealth, a life free from the drudgery that had defined my existence. It had also led me here to this house. They spoke my name, each syllable laced with a venomous familiarity. Raj, Raj, it felt like old skin. The front door was a distant, mocking silhouette. I had to reach it. But the scraping intensified, no longer confined to my feet. It was coming from the walls, from the very foundations of this accursed place. A slow, deliberate drag, like a nail being pulled from raw wood. My gaze darted to the grandfather clock in the hall. Its pendulum, which I'd never seen move, was now swinging with a frantic, erratic rhythm, its chimes a discordant shriek that seemed to tear at reality. Each strike was a hammer blow against my sanity. I remembered the old caretaker, his face a roadmap of fear. He'd warned me. Some things are best left undisturbed, lad. This house. It remembers. What did it remember? What had happened here? A low hum began to vibrate through the floor, a deep thrum that resonated in my chest cavity. It was a sound that felt ancient, primal. My heart, blessedly, wasn't pounding. It was a dull, heavy thud, each beat a painful reminder of my own fragile mortality. I wasn't going to run. Running had gotten me nowhere but deeper into this trap. I had to face it. Whatever it was. I took a tentative step forward, the scraping momentarily ceasing. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. It was a pregnant pause, a breath held before a scream. I scanned the hall, my eyes straining to pierce the gloom. Nothing. Only the looming staircase and the silent, watchful portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow my every move. Then a flicker of movement at the top of the stairs. It was a figure, impossibly tall and gaunt, its form indistinct, shifting like smoke. It didn't walk, it flowed, descending the stairs with an unnerving grace. You sought what was hidden, you found what was waiting. I felt a primal urge to scream, to flee, but my legs were rooted to the spot. The scent of decay intensified, laced with something metallic like old blood. I could feel its gaze, a palpable weight pressing down on me. The figure reached the bottom of the stairs. It stopped a few yards away. I still couldn't make out its features, only the impression of immense age, of something that had seen epochs pass. You are ours. My hands clenched into fists. No, not mine. I wouldn't let it have me. I wouldn't let this house break me. I thought of my life before, the endless struggle, the gnawing despair. This was supposed to be an escape. It had become a prison, but prisons could be broken. I don't belong to I croaked, my voice raw and trembling but firm. I want my inheritance. I want my life. A sound, like the cracking of dry bones, rippled through the air. It was laughter, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. The figure seemed to swell, its form expanding, filling the hall. The walls themselves seemed to press inward. Your life is here with us. The floor beneath me began to buckle, the viscous substance seeping up between the warped planks. It was trying to drag me down. My eyes fell on the ornate desk in the corner, near the entrance to the library. Papers were scattered across its surface, and the faint glow of a computer screen cast a weak light. The caretaker had mentioned Raj's grey tuncle, a recluse who spent his final years hunched over his research. Could there be something in there? A clue? A weakness? The pull intensified, the scraping returning with a vengeance, now coming from beneath the floorboards, a frantic, hungry sound. The figure loomed closer, a silent, terrifying promise. Could I make it? Would the knowledge within those dusty tomes offer salvation, or just another path to damnation? That's where I found myself, sprawled on the cold, damp floorboards, the stench of decay thick in my nostrils. The viscous substance, slick and unnervingly warm, had receded, leaving only a sticky residue and the unsettling impression of 1,000 tiny fingers scrabbling at my skin. My breath came in ragged gasps, each one a burning ember in my chest. The wood above me groaned, a low, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. It wasn't just the house settling, it was breathing. My gaze snapped to the ornate desk. Papers. I'd seen them, a chaotic jumble just before the floor had threatened to swallow me whole. My fingers, slick with something I didn't want to identify, scrabbled for purchase on the warped planks. Each movement sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. The tugging sensation, though gone, lingered like phantom limbs, a ghostly embrace I couldn't shake. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, my limbs feeling heavy, alien. The computers. They hummed with a low, persistent thrum, their screens casting an eerie, flickering light across the room. Each one was logged in, displaying a dizzying array of text, lines of code, and what looked like distorted images. I remembered the will, the promise of wealth, the cryptic warnings. This wasn't just a house, it was a trap, a predator disguised as an inheritance, and I had walked right into its jaws. I stumbled towards the desk, my eyes scanning the scattered papers. They were brittle, yellowed with age, covered in a spidery script that was both familiar and utterly alien. Names, dates, and then a phrase repeated, scrawled in a frantic hand. It feeds on what you fear most. The words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp air. My fears. The loneliness, the crushing weight of failure, the specter of abandonment. They had been more than just hallucinations. They had been fuel. I looked back at the computer screens. One displayed a complex flowchart, nodes branching out like a grotesque tree, connecting abstract concepts to specific individuals. My name was there, a prominent node linked to what? I leaned closer, my heart racing. The cursor blinked, a taunting, rhythmic pulse. I traced the connections, my mind struggling to grasp the sheer scale of it. This wasn't just about me. It was about generations, a legacy of, what? Consumption. Another screen showed a live feed, grainy and flickering, of the main hall. The grandfather clock stood silent, its pendulum still. A flicker, a distortion. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a heat haze rising from an unseen source. I felt a prickle of unease, a primal instinct screaming at me to run, but where? The doors were sealed, the windows barred, not by physical means, but by an invisible, suffocating force. I turned back to the papers, my fingers brushing against a loose leaf. It was a ledger filled with figures, but these weren't monetary. They were weights, and next to each name a number followed by a symbol that looked disturbingly like a stylized tear. My own name was there at the bottom of the most recent page, and the number next to it. It was higher than any other. I had given it so much. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the hallway, and I jumped, my head snapping up. The sound was distinct, unnatural. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, the low hum of the computers intensifying. I scrambled to my feet, my eyes darting towards the doorway, expecting. I didn't know what, a manifestation, a guardian, or just the house itself, finally deciding to reveal its true form. My gaze fell on the large oak door leading out of the library. It was closed as I had left it, but a thin line of light now seeped from beneath it, a pale, sickly yellow. It hadn't been there before. My breath hitched. There was something on the other side, or was the house merely toying with me, creating illusions to further fray my already tattered nerves? I took a hesitant step towards the door, then another. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. It was cool to the touch, smooth brass, utterly unremarkable. I had to know. I had to see what lay beyond, what horrors this place had conjured. The computers continued their silent vigil, their screens a testament to the house's insatiable hunger. The light beneath the door pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat, and I stood there poised on the precipice, the weight of its secrets pressing down on me. What was waiting for me just beyond that door?